Jamal Carter stands shackled in a Crestwood courtroom, Judge Harlan Voss's mocking laughter, booming as the gavel crashes, sentencing him to 6 months in juvenile detention for a theft he didn't commit. The gallery gasps, then falls silent as Jamal, voice steady despite the chains, declares, "I'll represent myself on appeal and bury you with your own laws." Voss's smirk vanishes, his cold eyes narrowing at this black teenager's audacity. What war has Jamal just ignited? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice against corruption, hit like and subscribe for more explosive stories like this. Jamal Carter pedaled his rusty bike down the cracked dirt roads of Crestwood, Alabama, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the drooping oaks, their Spanish moss swaying like ghostly fingers in the humid breeze. Sweat beaded on, his forehead soaking into the frayed collar of his second-hand t-shirt, but his wiry frame stayed steady, legs pumping with purpose as he headed toward the community center, a squat cinder-block building tucked behind a row of sagging shotgun houses. At 17, Jamal didn't waste time chasing girls or shooting hoops like the other kids at Crestwood High, his sharp brown eyes always fixed on something bigger, something most folks in this town never dared to dream of: justice. He'd spent the past 3 hours at the center, hunched over a wobbly table, helping black families who couldn't afford lawyers, his voice calm but firm as he explained how to fight eviction notices or dodge predatory loan traps, skills he'd taught himself. From dog-eared law books his mother Lena scavenged from thrift stores, the families called him a blessing, their tired faces lighting up with rare flickers of hope as he scribbled notes in his spiral notebook. But Jamal knew hope was a fragile thing in Crestwood, a place where Confederate statues glared down from. The town square and white folks still whispered heritage to excuse the invisible chains they'd never quite let go of. He packed up his things around 6, the sky turning a bruised purple, as he waved goodbye to Mrs. Jenkins, a grandmother who'd hugged him tight for saving her duplex from foreclosure, her trembling hands pressing a crumpled $5 bill into his palm that he'd slipped back into her purse when she wasn't looking. Slinging his backpack over one shoulder, he hopped on his bike and started the 3-mile ride home, the air thick with the scent of pine and the distant hum of cicadas, his mind replaying a landlord statute he'd memorized the night before, until a sudden roar snapped him out of it. A beat-up silver pickup truck screeched around the bend ahead, kicking up clouds of red dust that stung his eyes, and Jamal swerved hard, his front tire skidding into a ditch as the vehicle blasted past, close enough that he felt the heat of its exhaust on his bare arms. He recognized the driver instantly. Travis Pruitt, the sheriff's son, a lanky white kid with a buzz cut and a permanent sneer, his blue eyes glinting with the kind of reckless entitlement that came from knowing Crestwood would always catch him when he fell. Travis didn't even glance back as the truck veered toward the highway, its tailgate rattling, but Jamal's instincts kicked in, sharp and honed from years of watching this town chew up kids who looked like him. He yanked his cracked phone from his pocket, hands steady despite the adrenaline, and hit record, capturing 30 shaky seconds of the truck's license plate and Travis's pale arm dangling out the window, the footage grainy but clear enough to show who was behind the wheel. Jamal exhaled, chest tight, knowing this wasn't his fight, not yet. The stolen truck was someone else's problem, and calling the cops in Crestwood was like tossing meat to wolves when you were black and breathing. He stuffed the phone back into his jeans and pedaled on, the road stretching quiet and empty ahead, the sun dipping lower until it was just a sliver above the pines, casting the world in a hazy golden glow that felt more like a warning than a promise. He'd made it half a mile when the wail of a siren split the stillness, a sound that sent ice through his veins because he knew it wasn't coming for Travis. A patrol car screeched around the corner, dust exploding in its wake, and Jamal barely had time to brake before it skidded to a stop beside him, its headlights blinding him as he shielded his eyes with one hand, the other gripping the handlebars tight. Deputy Roy Tate stepped out, all 6 feet of him, a barrel-chested white man. With a buzzed head and a jaw like a bulldog, his hand already resting on the holster at his hip, his gray eyes narrowing as he sized Jamal up like prey. Jamal froze, heart pounding but hands visible, palms open in the air because he'd learned young that moving wrong could get you killed in this town, his mother's voice echoing in his head. Stay calm. Stay alive. Tate's boots crunched on the gravel as he stalked forward, his voice a low growl. "You stop right there." And Jamal nodded, keeping his tone even. "Is there a problem, officer?" The question was barely out before Tate's face twisted, a snarl breaking through as he lunged, grabbing Jamal's arm and yanking him off the bike, the metal frame clattering to the ground as Jamal stumbled, catching himself on his knees. "Don't get smart with me, boy," Tate snapped, his grip tightening like a vice. "Where's the truck?" Jamal's mind raced, confusion warring with the sinking realization of what was happening. "What truck?" he asked, voice steady, though his muscles tensed under Tate's hold. "The pickup you just stole," Tate barked, his breath hot with tobacco stink. "Silver seen tearing out of here, that sound familiar?" Jamal blinked, stunned, the pieces clicking too fast and too wrong. "I didn't steal anything, I was riding home." But Tate wasn't listening, his meaty hand digging harder into Jamal's arm as he sneered. "Think I'm stupid? We got a report, black male, hoodie, jeans, running from the scene. That's you, ain't it?" Jamal's stomach dropped, the description so vague it could have been any black kid in Crestwood. But he knew it wasn't an accident, it was a script, one Travis had probably laughed while writing. "I've got video proof," Jamal said, reaching slowly for his pocket, careful not to spook the deputy. "I recorded who really took it." But Tate didn't wait. His knee slammed into Jamal's ribs, knocking the wind out of him as he shoved him face first into the dirt, the taste of earth and blood filling his mouth. "Stop resisting," Tate grunted, though Jamal hadn't moved, his cheeks scraping against rocks as the deputy's weight pinned him down, cold metal cuffs snapping, shut around his wrists, biting into his skin until he felt the sting of broken flesh. Jamal gasped, the phone slipping from his fingers into the gravel, and Tate scooped it up, smirking as he crushed it under his boot, the screen splintering with a sickening crunch. "Evidence don't mean squat when you're you," he said, voice dripping with venom as he hauled Jamal to his feet, slamming him against the patrol car's hood. The world spun, pain radiating from his ribs and wrists, but Jamal's mind stayed razor-sharp, cataloging every word, every move, because he knew this wasn't just a bad stop, it was a setup, and Travis Pruitt's joyride had just handed Crestwood's law a perfect excuse to bury him. Tate shoved him into the back seat, the door slamming shut with a clang that echoed in the empty dusk, and as the car peeled out, Jamal caught a glimpse of his bike lying twisted in the ditch, a lone witness to the truth no one in this town cared to see. The interior smelled of stale sweat and cheap vinyl, and Jamal sat stiff, shoulders aching, the cuffs cutting deeper with every bump in the road, his breath shallow but his thoughts racing. He'd done nothing wrong. He had proof, or he had until Tate smashed it. And now he was alone in the belly of a beast that didn't just bend the law, it broke it to fit its own skin. The patrol car rumbled past flickering streetlights, Crestwood's quiet streets blurring outside the window. And Jamal clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms as he replayed the video in his mind. Travis's smug face, the truck's plate gone now but not forgotten. Because if they thought this would shut him up, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Tate glanced back through the rearview mirror, his smirk a jagged slash in the dim light. "One less punk off my streets," he muttered, and Jamal met his gaze, silent but unyielding, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and he'd make them regret ever crossing his path. The car turned onto the highway, the sheriff's station looming ahead like a squat, ugly fortress, and Jamal braced himself, knowing the real fight hadn't even started yet, his mother's lessons ringing louder than ever. The law's a weapon. Jamal learned to wield it, and as the cuffs bit into his wrists, he swore he would, no matter how hard Crestwood tried to break him. Jamal Carter stood in the Crestwood courthouse, a crumbling brick relic with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps overhead, his wrists still raw from the cuffs Deputy Roy Tate had slapped on him the night before, the metal chains clinking softly as he shifted his weight, every eye in the room boring into him like he was a sideshow freak. The air stank of old coffee and older grudges, thick with the humidity that clung to Alabama summers, and Judge Harlan Voss loomed on the bench, a silver-haired giant in a crisp black robe, his gravelly voice cutting through the murmurs as he peered down at Jamal with a smirk that could curdle milk. Well, well, another hood rat wasting taxpayer time. What a surprise. The gallery, A sparse mix of white faces and a few black ones too scared to speak up, rustled uncomfortably. But Jamal didn't flinch, his sharp brown eyes locked on Voss, because he'd spent years turning fear into fuel, memorizing law books, while other kids memorized rap lyrics, and he wasn't about to let this old bigot break him. His mother, Lena Carter, sat in the front row, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a double shift, her dark hair pulled back tight, her hands clasped so hard her knuckles whitened. And when Voss banged his gavel, demanding silence, she shot too, her feet, voice trembling but fierce. "Your Honor, my son's innocent. He's got proof. You can't lock him up like this." Voss's cold blue eyes flicked to her, his lip curling as he barked, "Sit down, woman, or I'll have you hauled out. This ain't your soapbox." And Lena sank back, her glare burning holes through the judge, because she'd taught Jamal every statute he knew, whispering late at night over kitchen tables littered with legal pads. "They'll twist the law, baby, but you can twist it back." The bailiff shoved Jamal forward, his sneakers squeaking on the scuffed linoleum, and Voss leaned back, flipping through a file with theatrical boredom. Grand theft auto, resisting arrest, quite the rap sheet for a kid who looks like he can't even spell jail. And the room chuckled, a low, ugly sound that made Jamal's fists clench, but he kept his face stone cold, knowing every word was a trap meant to bait him. The public defender, a sweaty white guy named Paul Grayson with a cheap suit and cheaper cologne, shuffled up beside him, mumbling, "Plead guilty, kid. I'll get you probation, maybe a month in juvie." But Jamal turned, voice low and cutting, "You're fired." And Grayson blinked, stunned, as Jamal stepped forward, addressing Voss directly. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor, and I move for bail." The gallery gasped, a ripple of shock spreading like wildfire, and Voss's smirk widened, predatory and amused. "You? A lawyer? Boy, I've seen stray dogs with better sense. Bail's denied. You're a flight risk, plain and simple." And Jamal's heart sank, not because he hadn't expected it, but because the words landed like a slap, the system flexing its muscle to keep him caged. Lena shouted again, "Flight risk, he's 17, an honor student, he's never even left." "Crestwood!" But Voss slammed his gavel, the crack echoing off the walls. "One more word and it's contempt, lady." And she bit her lip, tears glinting but unshed, because she knew this wasn't about evidence, it was about power, and Jamal was a black kid, daring to breathe in their courtroom. Voss nodded to Grayson, who stammered, Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty," but Jamal cut him off, voice steady as steel. "I said I'm handling this, and the arrest lacked probable cause, Alabama Code Section 1552. Requires specific articulable facts. Tate had none, just a hunch and my skin color." And he stood taller, the words flowing like a river, every syllable crisp from nights spent reciting laws under a flickering bulb. The room went dead silent, Grayson's jaw dropping, the bailiff freezing mid-step, and even Voss paused, his smirk faltering for a split second, eyes narrowing as if he'd just spotted a snake in his garden, because this wasn't the script. This kid wasn't supposed to know the game, let alone play it. What did this teenager just do? Could a shackled boy really rattle a judge who'd crushed hundreds before him? Voss leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. "Cute trick, boy. Memorizing a few lines don't make you Perry Mason. But I'll bite. Let's hear your plea." And Jamal squared his shoulders. "Not guilty, and I'll prove it, but..." Before the words settled, Tate swaggered in from the back, uniform crisp, his bulldog jaw set, and Voss waved him up. "Deputy, anything to add?" Tate grinned. "Kid fought me tooth and nail, resisting all the way, dangerous type," and Jamal's blood boiled. A lie so bold it stank, but he held his tongue, knowing the fix was in. Voss nodded, slow and deliberate. "Sounds clear to me. Theft's shaky, I'll give you that. But resisting arrest holds 6 months in juvie, case closed." And the gavel fell, a thunderclap sealing Jamal's fate, the gallery erupting in whispers as Lena cried out, "That's a lie, he didn't." "Resist!" But the bailiff grabbed her arm, dragging her back as Voss chuckled. "Take the plea next time, kid, save us all the circus." Jamal stood frozen, the chains heavier now, a bitter taste in his mouth because he'd landed a punch. He'd shown them his mind was a weapon, but they'd twisted it anyway, slapping on a bogus charge to bury him deeper, and as Tate smirked, from the witness stand, Jamal locked eyes with him, a silent vow burning in his chest. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The courtroom cleared slow, folks shuffling out with heads down, avoiding Lena's glare as she fought tears. And Jamal felt the weight of it all, the humiliation, the mockery, but also the spark. He'd made Voss blink, and that was power. A crack in the wall he'd widen with his bare hands if he had to. What kind of system laughs at a kid for knowing the law? How does a judge sleep at night after rigging the scales? Jamal's mind raced as the bailiff yanked him toward the holding pen, his mother's sobs fading behind him. And he knew this was just the first round. Crestwood thought they'd won, but they'd only lit the fuse. Tell us in the comments. Number 1. If you think Jamal's brilliance deserved better than Voss's sneer, hit that like button if you're raging at this injustice, and subscribe to catch every twist as this fight explodes. Was Jamal right to fire his defender and swing back, or did he just paint a bigger target on his back? Stick around because the next blow's coming and it's gonna hit harder than you think. Jamal Carter jolted awake as the transport van lurched to a stop, its rusted frame groaning after a 30-minute ride from the Crestwood courthouse, the air inside thick with the stench of gasoline and despair. His wrists still chafed from the cuffs that clinked with every bump, the raw skin stinging as sweat trickled into the cuts. The back doors swung open, and a beefy guard with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl yanked him out, shoving him toward Crestwood Juvenile Detention, a sweltering brick box squatting on the edge of town, its barbed wire fence glinting in the late afternoon sun like a predator's teeth. Heat radiated off the cracked pavement, the Alabama humidity pressing down like a wet blanket, and Jamal stumbled forward, his sneakers crunching gravel as the guard barked, "Move it, lawyer kid!" The nickname spat out like a curse, a mocking echo of Judge Harlan Voss's sneer that had landed him here. Inside, the intake room buzzed with fluorescent lights, the walls stained yellow from years of neglect. And another guard, a wiry man with a patchy beard, frisked him rough, fingers digging into his ribs where Tate's knee had left bruises, his smirk widening as Jamal winced. "Heard you're a big shot, huh? Let's see how long that lasts." They stripped him of his clothes, tossing him an orange jumpsuit 2 sizes too big, the fabric rough against his skin, and marched him down a dim hallway, the clang of metal doors and distant shouts filling the air, every sound a reminder that this wasn't just punishment. It was a war zone designed to break him. His cell was a 6x8 concrete coffin, the mattress a thin slab stained with God knows what, the toilet in the corner reeking of rust and rot, and as the door slammed shut, the lock clicking with finality, Jamal stood still, chest tight, his mind racing to catalogue every detail, because he'd learned young that survival meant staying sharp, even when the world wanted you dull. Hours bled into night, the heat unrelenting even as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Jamal paced the tiny space, replaying Voss's gavel, Tate's lies, his mother's sobs, until a sudden roar erupted outside, footsteps thundering closer, and the cell door flew open, 3 inmates storming in, their fists cocked and eyes wild with purpose. The first, a stocky kid with a shaved head and a scar slicing his eyebrow, swung hard, catching Jamal's jaw with a crack that sent him sprawling, blood flooding his mouth, as the second, a lanky boy with tattoos snaking up his arms, kicked his ribs, the same spot Tate had hit, pain exploding like a firework. "Tate says hi," the third grunted, a hulking figure with a buzz cut and a gold tooth, landing a punch to Jamal's gut that doubled him over, gasping, and Jamal realized this wasn't random, it was a hit, paid for by the deputy who'd smashed his phone and framed him for Travis Pruitt's crime. He curled into a ball, protecting his head as blows rained down, the concrete cold against his cheek. But through the haze of pain, he heard a guard's voice drift from the hall, casual and low. "Travis Pruitt's truck, huh? Kid's got enemies." And Jamal's ears pricked, a lifeline in the chaos because that name tied it all together. The sheriff's son, the real thief, the reason he was here. The beating stopped as quick as it started, the inmate slipping out with a final kick, leaving Jamal crumpled and bleeding, his jumpsuit torn, his left eye swelling shut, but his mind burned brighter than ever. Travis Pruitt, Tate, Voss, a chain of corruption he'd snap if it killed him. He dragged himself to the mattress, every breath a knife in his side, and fumbled under the frame, finding a stubby pencil some past prisoner had stashed, its tip dulled but usable, and with trembling, Hands, he tore a square of toilet paper from the roll, the thin sheet crinkling as he pressed it flat. His ribs screamed, his vision blurred, but he wrote, scratching out an appeal motion in tight, jagged letters, citing illegal detention, lack of evidence, excessive force. Every statute he'd memorized spilling onto the fragile page because, if they thought they'd silence him, they'd misjudged the fire in his bones. Dawn broke, grey light seeping through the barred window, and Lena arrived for visitation, her face a mask of exhaustion behind the scratched plexiglass, her nurse's scrubs swapped for a faded dress, her voice cracking as she pressed her hand. To the divider, "Baby, what did they do to you?" Jamal forced a smile, hiding the pain, and slid the toilet paper motion under the slot, whispering, "File this, Ma, it's my way out." And Lena nodded, fierce pride flickering through her tears, tucking it into her purse as the guard called time. She left, and Jamal leaned back, hope flickering, until two guards stormed in an hour later, the wiry one snatching the mattress, the beefy one grinning. "Lost your little note, huh? Must have slipped through the cracks." And Jamal's stomach plunged. They'd intercepted it, trashed it, his lifeline gone, but worse came when the cell door opened again that night. Sheriff Dwayne Pruitt himself stepping in, a towering man with a grey mustache and eyes like coal, his starched uniform crisp as he loomed over Jamal's bruised form. "Keep writing, boy," Pruitt growled, voice low and thick with menace. "And you won't make it out alive. My son's untouchable, and you're just a cockroach we'll squash." And he spat on the floor, the glob landing inches from Jamal's feet, a punctuation mark to the threat that hung heavy in the stale air. Pruitt turned, boots thudding as he left, the door locking behind him, and Jamal sat there, blood crusted on his lip, ribs throbbing, the sheriff's words sinking in like poison, because this wasn't just about a stolen truck anymore. It was personal, a vendetta from the top, and they'd kill him before they let him win. He stared at the wall, the pencil still clutched in his fist, and though his body ached, his mind sharpened. They'd taken his motion, his proof, his hope, but they couldn't take his fight. And as the cell grew darker, the hum of the facility fading into a restless quiet, Jamal traced the law in his head. Every clause, every loophole, because 6 months was a death sentence only if he let it be. The guard's taunts echoed down the hall. "Lawyer kid's finito." But Jamal clenched his jaw, tasting copper, and vowed they'd choke on those words, because he wasn't just surviving this hell, he was mapping it. Every crack, every weakness. And when he got out, whether by law or by blood, Crestwood would pay. The night stretched on, the heat suffocating, and Jamal lay on the bare concrete, the pencil his only weapon, his mother's lessons his only shield, and Pruitt's threat, his new fuel. Because if they wanted a war, he'd give them one they'd never forget. Jamal Carter slumped against the cold concrete wall of his cell in Crestwood Juvenile Detention, the orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his wiry frame, every breath a sharp stab through his bruised ribs, the swelling around his left eye pulsing, with a dull ache as the second night in this sweltering brick hell dragged on, the air thick with mildew, and the faint tang of blood dried on his lip from the beating Deputy Tate's hired thugs had delivered. The pencil stub he'd clutched like a lifeline lay hidden under his thin mattress, its tip worn to a nub, and though Sheriff Pruitt's death threat still echoed in his skull, Jamal's mind churned, plotting, because giving up wasn't in his blood, not when his mother Lena had raised him to fight with wits sharper than any fist. Footsteps clattered down the hall, soft and sneaky, not the heavy thud of guards, and Jamal tensed, ready for another attack, until a familiar face peeked through the bars. Caleb Monroe, his best friend from Crestwood High, a lanky white kid, with messy blonde hair and a nervous grin, his blue eyes darting as he whispered, "Jamal, you okay, man?" Caleb was a coder, a tech whiz who'd spent hours with Jamal swapping ideas over lukewarm soda, the only white kid who'd ever stuck by him in a town that drew lines in the dirt, and seeing him now, sneaking past guards, sparked a flicker of hope in Jamal's chest. "How'd you get in?" Jamal rasped, voice hoarse from disuse, and Caleb held up a burner phone, its cracked screen glowing faintly. "Bribed a janitor, $50. I've got a plan. We're busting you out of this mess." Jamal straightened, ignoring the pain as Caleb leaned closer. "Traffic cams on Route 12 caught Travis Pruitt peeling out in that truck. I hacked the city's system. It's grainy, but it's him, not you. We've got proof Tate's lying." And Jamal's heart leapt, a rush of relief so strong he almost laughed, because this was it, the key to cracking Crestwood's frame-up wide open. They huddled by the bars, voices low, Caleb's fingers trembling as he showed the footage, a blurry timestamp pinning Travis behind the wheel at 6:03 p.m., just as Jamal had recorded before Tate smashed his phone, and Jamal grinned, fierce and wild. "You're a genius, man. File this with the court. Get it to my mum. We're ending this." And Caleb nodded, eyes bright. "On it. I'll have it to Lena by morning. Hang tight." They clasped hands through the bars, a quick, firm grip, and Caleb slipped away, his sneakers silent on the concrete, leaving Jamal buzzing with a high he hadn't felt since Voss's gavel fell. Because with this, he wasn't just surviving. He was winning, or so he thought. Hours ticked by, the cell block humming with restless snores, and Jamal paced, replaying the plan, imagining Lena storming the courthouse with that video until a clang jolted him alert, the door swinging open. But it wasn't freedom coming through, it was chaos. 3 guards barged in, the wiry one with the patchy beard leading the charge, his baton raised, and behind him stood Caleb, head bowed, hands stuffed in his pockets, avoiding Jamal's stare as the beefy guard snarled, "Caught your little buddy sneaking out. Guess he ain't as slick as he thinks." Jamal's stomach plummeted, ice flooding his veins, and the wiry guard tossed the burner phone onto the floor, stomping it to shards with a vicious grin. "Oh, and that footage gone. Funny how it disappeared right after he handed it over." And Jamal's eyes snapped to Caleb, voice cracking. "What did you do?" Caleb flinched, mumbling, "They caught me, man. Pruitt offered cash. $500. I had to. My folks need it." And the betrayal hit harder than any punch, a knife twisting in Jamal's gut as the guards laughed, the sound raw and guttural. "So your little white savior's gone," the beefy one sneered, cracking his knuckles. "Now it's just you and us." And before Jamal could process the sting of Caleb's sellout, the baton swung, slamming into his shoulder with a sickening thud, sending him crashing to the mattress as the second guard's boot found his spine, pain exploding white-hot across his back. He curled tight, arms shielding his head, but the blows kept coming. A fist to his kidney, a kick to his thigh, each hit a message, Pruitt's message, that no ally, no proof, no hope would stand against Crestwood's machine, and Jamal bit his lip bloody to keep from screaming, because they'd hear weakness, not defiance. The wiry guard grabbed his hair, yanking his head back. "Should have stayed quiet, lawyer kid," and smashed his face into the concrete, a burst of stars blinding him as blood pooled under his cheek, warm and sticky, the beating stretching into a blur of agony until they finally stepped back, panting, leaving him a crumpled heap, the cell door slamming shut with a clang that rang in his ears. Jamal lay there, chest heaving, every inch of him screaming, the shattered phone glinting in the dim light like a mocking ghost of his lost chance, and Caleb's betrayal burned deeper than the bruises, because he'd trusted him, leaned on him, and now he was alone, truly alone, in a cage that didn't just hold him, it hunted him. He dragged himself up, slow and shaky, the mattress creaking under his weight, and wiped the blood from his nose, smearing it across his sleeve, his swollen eye throbbing, but his mind didn't break. It hardened, because Pruitt and Tate and Voss could beat him, betray him, bury him, but they couldn't erase what he knew, what he was. The cell block quieted, the guard's footsteps fading, and Jamal stared at the wall, breath ragged, replaying Caleb's words. "My folks need it." And the rage mixed with pity, because Crestwood broke everyone, even the ones who thought they were safe, but he wouldn't let it break him, not yet. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms, and vowed to fight smarter, harder, because if trust was gone, he'd be his own army, and when he got out, he'd make them regret ever underestimating him, because this wasn't just about a truck or a frame-up anymore. It was about proving they couldn't own him, not his body, not his soul. Did Caleb's betrayal cut you deeper than the guard's fists? Can you forgive a friend who'd sell you out to save his own skin? Comment number 1 if you think Jamal's stronger alone. Hit like if this injustice makes your blood boil, and subscribe to see how he claws his way back. What happens when a kid with no one left to trust faces a system that's already counted him out? Buckle up, the next round's gonna flip everything you thought you knew. Jamal Carter stepped out of the Crestwood juvenile detention transport van 10 days after Caleb's betrayal. the late morning sun blazing down on the courthouse steps, his orange jumpsuit swapped for a borrowed button-up shirt and slacks from Lena, the fabric stiff and too big, hanging off his wiry frame as he limped forward, ribs still tender from the guard's fists, his left eye a fading purple bruise that drew stares from the sparse crowd milling outside. Lena had pawned her car to scrape together the $5,000 bail. Her nurse's wages stretched thin, and she walked beside him now, her dark eyes fierce with pride and worry, her hand brushing his shoulder as they climbed the steps, the air thick with Alabama heat and the sour tang of exhaust from idling sheriff's cruisers. Inside, the courthouse hummed with a restless energy, the same peeling paint and buzzing fluorescents greeting him, but this time Jamal carried no cuffs, only a stack of scribbled notes he'd pieced together in his cell, snatched moments between beatings etched onto pilfered scraps of paper with that dull pencil stub. Every word a weapon he'd honed in the dark. The appeal hearing loomed, his one shot to overturn Judge Harlan Voss's 6-month juvie sentence. And as they entered courtroom 3B, the gallery rustled, a mix of black faces from the community center and white ones who'd come to gawk, their whispers rising like steam as Jamal took his seat at the defense table. Alone, no lawyer, just a 17-year-old black kid facing a system that chewed up defiance and spat out obedience. Voss swept in, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his black robe crisp as he settled onto the bench, his cold blue eyes locking onto Jamal with a smirk that promised pain. "Back so soon, Mr. Carter. Guess juvie didn't teach you humility." And the room chuckled, a low mocking rumble that made Lena grip the bench in front of her, knuckles whitening, but Jamal stood tall, voice steady. "I'm here to appeal, Your Honor, representing myself, and I move to vacate the theft conviction. No evidence supports it." The gallery hushed, a ripple of shock spreading, and Voss leaned forward, amused. "Bold words, boy. Let's see if your little jailhouse law degree holds up." And Jamal launched in, no hesitation, his notes clutched tight as he unleashed a memorized barrage of case law, voice ringing clear. Alabama Code Section 1552 demands probable cause. Deputy Tate's arrest relied on a vague description. Black male, no specific facts, no witness, no stolen truck in my possession. Violated Terry v. Ohio, 1968. Supreme Court suspicion alone ain't enough. He paced slow, every word landing like a hammer. Tate destroyed my phone, my exculpatory evidence, showing Travis Pruitt driving that truck. Suppression of that violates Brady v. Maryland, 1963. Due process shredded. And the resisting charge. No body cam, no proof, just his word against mine, a lie to pad the frame up. And the room held its breath, Lena's eyes shining, the gallery shifting as black folks nodded, white ones frowned, and even Voss's smirk flickered, his gavel hand twitching like he itched to silence this kid who dared wield the law like a blade. What was this teenager doing, dismantling their game with their own rules? Could a shackled boy from Crestwood really shake a judge's throne? Jamal pressed on, relentless. "I've got precedent, Your Honor. Gideon versus Wainwright guarantees my right to defend myself, and I'm exercising it. The theft charge collapses under its own weight. No corpus delicti, no crime proven beyond." Tate's bias, and he stopped, chest heaving, notes trembling in his grip, the silence deafening as Voss stared, eyes narrowing, a predator sizing up prey that refused to play dead. The judge leaned back, slow and deliberate. "Well, I'll be damned, you got a mouth on you, kid, I'll give you that." And the gallery erupted, cheers from the black side, murmurs from the white, Lena clapping soft but fierce, and he... Voss banged his gavel, voice cutting through. "Order, I said order. Theft's flimsy, I'll grant that. Overturned, you're off that hook." And Jamal's heart soared, a rush of triumph flooding his veins, because he'd done it. He'd cracked their wall. He was free, or so he thought. The cheers died fast as Voss raised a hand, smirk curling back. "But resisting arrest, that's another story, Deputy Tate. Step up." And Tate swaggered in, uniform pressed, bulldog jaw set, his grey eyes glinting with malice as he took the stand. "New testimony, Your Honor. Kid fought me tooth and nail, swung at me, tried to run, dangerous type, got witnesses now." And Jamal's blood froze. A lie so bold it stank worse than the cell block, because he'd never swung, never ran, just taken the beating. But two guards shuffled in behind Tate, nodding, their faces blank but bought. And Voss nodded. "Sounds solid to me. Theft's out. but resisting sticks, 6 months probation, 100 hours community service, step out of line, and it's jail case closed. The gavel crashed, a thunderclap stealing Jamal's victory, and Lena shot up, "That's a lie, he didn't resist, you're framing him again." But Voss snapped, "Sit or it's contempt." And the bailiff shoved her down, the gallery buzzing as Jamal stood numb, the wind souring in his throat because he'd beaten the theft, exposed the sham, but they'd twisted it, slapped on a new chain, and as Voss chuckled, "Learn your place, boy." Jamal knew this wasn't justice, it was punishment for daring to fight. Tate stepped off the stand, smirking, and leaned close as Jamal gathered his notes, whispering, "This ain't over, genius. You think you're slick, but we own you." And the words landed like a punch, a promise of worse to come, because Crestwood didn't let black kids win. Not clean, not ever. Lena grabbed his arm as the room cleared, voice low. "You did it, baby. You got half. We'll fight the rest." And Jamal nodded, jaw tight, the probation papers shoved into his hands by a clerk, a leash he'd wear for months. But his mind didn't rest, it spun because he'd rattled Voss, shaken Tate, and that meant they'd hit harder next time. Outside, the sun beat down, the steps slick with heat, and Tate lingered by his cruiser, watching Jamal with that same smirk, a predator biding his time. And Jamal met his gaze, unblinking, because 6 months in juvie was off the table, but the war was just heating up, and he'd be ready because they'd underestimated him once, and he'd make damn sure they never forgot it. The crowd parted, some slapping his back, others glaring, and Lena squeezed his hand. "We're not done." But Jamal felt the weight. Probation wasn't freedom. It was a cage with longer bars. And as Tate's cruiser peeled out, dust swirling, Jamal knew the deputy's threat wasn't idle. It was a storm brewing, and he'd have to outsmart it, outlast it, because in Crestwood, winning once just painted a bigger target on your back. Jamal Carter stepped out of the Crestwood courthouse into a late afternoon haze, the Alabama sun sinking low, painting the sky a fiery orange that clashed with the chill creeping up his spine, his borrowed slacks chafing against his legs as he clutched the probation papers, 6 months of leash and 100 hours of community service branded on his soul, a bitter aftertaste to the theft charge he'd just shredded with his own hands. Lena walked beside him, her nurse's scrubs swapped for a faded jacket, her dark eyes scanning the street, her voice low but electric. "You shook 'em, baby, they didn't see that coming." And Jamal nodded, jaw tight, because overturning, Voss's theft conviction felt like a win, a crack in Crestwood's armor. But Tate's whispered threat, "This ain't over, genius," lingered like smoke, a promise of worse brewing beneath the town's sleepy facade. Word of his appeal spread fast, wildfire through the black neighborhoods, kids from the community center whispering his name like a legend. "Jamal beat the judge, man. He's one of us." And by nightfall, a dozen teens gathered outside the courthouse, fists raised, shouting, "No more lies, no more chains." Their voices raw with years of swallowed rage, because Jamal's fight wasn't just his, it was theirs, a spark igniting a town tired of bowing. The next morning, graffiti bloomed on the Confederate statue in the square. Justice for Jamal in red paint, bold and sloppy, and black folks who'd sat silent in church pews started talking loud and proud about cops who hunted their sons, judges who crushed their dreams, and a sheriff who shielded his own while others bled. Jamal felt it walking home with Lena, the air buzzing with something new, something dangerous. Folks nodding at him from porches, kids running up to slap his hand. "You showed 'em, man." And for a moment, he let himself smile, because maybe this was power, maybe this was change, but Crestwood didn't bend for hope, it broke it. Sheriff Dwayne Pruitt didn't wait long to strike back, his gray mustache twitching as he stood in his office that night, staring at grainy security footage of the statue, his son Travis lounging in the corner, smirking. "Told you that, kids. Trouble, Pop." And Pruitt growled, "He's a match, we're the gasoline," before barking orders to his deputies because Jamal's win wasn't a fluke, it was a threat, and threats got crushed. By dawn, a new video hit the local news, doctored footage showing a figure in a hoodie spray painting the statue, the face blurred but the build eerily like Jamal's, and Pruitt held a press conference, voice booming, "We've got vandalism." Tied to Jamal Carter, a known agitator. "This ain't justice, it's chaos." And the white side of Crestwood roared, "Lock him up again," while Lena watched the TV, fists clenched, They're lying, baby, they're scared. Jamal's probation officer, a pinched-faced white man named Earl Hicks with Voss's stink all over him, called within hours, "Caught you on tape, Carter. Violation logged, 1 step from jail." And Jamal protested, "That's not me, check. The time I was home." But Hicks hung up, the leash tightening, because truth didn't matter when the system wrote the script. That night, the backlash turned feral. A mob of white men in pickup trucks roared down Lena's street, tires screeching as they circled her sagging shotgun house, its peeling blue paint trembling under the assault. And Jamal woke to shattering. Glass a brick crashing through the living room window, the word "thug lawyer" scrawled on it in black marker. Shards glittering on the floor as Lena yanked him down. "Stay low, baby," her voice shaking but steady. More bricks followed, windows exploding one by one, and then the spray cans came out, red paint slashing across the walls. "Go back where you came from," the letters dripping like blood, and Jamal's heart pounded. Not just fear, but fury, because this was his home, his fight, and they were burning it down for daring to stand tall. Neighbors peeked from curtains but stayed inside, too scared to cross the line. And as the trucks peeled away, their laughter echoing, Jamal stood, glass crunching under his sneakers, staring at the wreckage, the community's hope flipped into a target on his back, and Lena whispered, "We can't stay here." But Jamal shook his head. "I'm not running, Ma." Morning brought a witness, Ms. Tilly, a wiry old black woman who ran the corner store, her grey braids swinging as she marched up, voice trembling. "I saw Pruitt himself plant that spray can in your yard, Jamal, before the mob came. I'll swear to it." And Jamal's pulse quickened, a lifeline, proof to flip this nightmare, so he grabbed his notebook, scribbling her statement. "We take this to court, Ma, we've got him." And Lena nodded, fierce. "Let's move fast." They raced to Tilly's store, a cramped shack with flickering lights, to record her on Lena's cracked phone. Her words gold. "Sheriff Pruitt, 10 p.m. Dropped it by your fence. I saw his badge glint." And Jamal felt victory rising again, a chance to bury Pruitt's lie. But as they stepped outside, a plume of smoke curled into the sky, the store's roof erupting in flames, an orange glow swallowing the building whole. Tilly screamed, "My life's in there!" And Jamal lunged toward the fire, heat searing his face, but Lena pulled him back. "It's gone, baby!" As sirens wailed, too late, the blaze roaring like a beast unleashed, and Jamal watched, helpless as Pruitt's cruiser rolled by slow, the sheriff's coal-black eyes locking with his through the window, a smirk curling his lips. Because this wasn't just vandalism, it was arson, a message torched into the night, silence or burn. The fire trucks came, water hissing against the inferno, but Tilly's store was ash by midnight, her statement lost in the smoke, and Jamal stood in the street, fists balled, the mob's paint still wet on his house, Pruitt's frame-up tightening. Like a noose, because every win he clawed out brought a harder fall, and Crestwood wasn't just fighting him, it was erasing him piece by piece. Lena hugged him tight. "We'll find another way." But Jamal's mind raced. The community's cheers now ashes, the backlash a storm he'd unleashed, and as the embers glowed, he knew Pruitt wouldn't stop. Not until he was caged or dead, and the fight had just gone from courtroom to war zone. Should Jamal have known his win would spark this fire? Can one kid's fight really topple a town's hate, or does it just fan the flames? Comment number 1 if you think Pruitt's gone too far to turn back. Hit like if this retaliation makes you want to scream, and subscribe to see Jamal strike back against this inferno. What happens when a sheriff burns evidence to bury the truth, and a kid's only weapon is the ashes left behind? Stay locked in, because the next twist will leave you speechless. Jamal Carter stood in the charred rubble of Ms. Tilly's store, the acrid stench of burnt wood and melted plastic stinging his nose, the Alabama dawn breaking gray and heavy over Crestwood, his sneakers crunching on blackened glass as he stared. At the smoldering husk, the last wisps of smoke curling into the sky like ghosts of the evidence Pruitt had torched. Tilly's statement gone, his house still scarred with red paint and shattered windows from the mob's rage. Lena paced beside him, her faded jacket pulled tight against the morning chill, her voice a low growl. "They think they've won, burning her out. But we're not done, baby." And Jamal nodded, jaw clenched, because the fire hadn't just taken Tilly's store, it had lit a fury in him that no water could douse. Pruitt's smirk from the cruiser replaying in his mind, a taunt he'd turn into a weapon. They couldn't stay in the house, not with the walls screaming thug lawyer and the glass jagged like teeth. So Lena packed a duffel with clothes and legal pads, and they crashed at her co-worker's trailer 3 miles out. A rusted tin box with a sagging roof, but safe for now. Jamal sat at a wobbly kitchen table, the trailer's thin walls rattling in the wind, and flipped through his notebook, the edges singed from the night's chaos, his sharp brown eyes tracing every scribbled law he'd memorized, because the courtroom was locked. Hicks was watching, but the airwaves were wide open and he knew just who to call. Aisha Brooks ran Crestwood's only black radio station, a crackling AM signal from a shed behind her aunt's diner, her voice a lifeline for folks the white papers ignored, and Jamal had met her once, helping her dodge a tax lien with a loophole. He dug up so when Lena dialed her that morning, Aisha answered fast. "Jamal, that you? I heard about Tilly. What's the play?" He leaned into the phone, voice steady. "Pruitt framed me for the statue, burned Tilly's store to shut her up. I've got no tape, but I've got my word. Blow this open." And Aisha didn't hesitate. "On air in 2 hours, kid. Bring the heat." They rolled up to the shed at 9, a squat shack with peeling paint and a crooked antenna, the air inside thick with coffee and static, and Aisha shoved a mic in Jamal's face, her dreadlocks swinging as she hit record. "You're live, Crestwood's listening, go." And Jamal unleashed it all, voice raw but razor sharp. "Sheriff Dwayne Pruitt planted a spray can in my yard, sent a mob to trash my house, then torched Tilly's store to kill her testimony. He's covering for his son Travis, the real thief, and they're burying me because I'm black and I fought back." Lena stood behind him, eyes blazing, and Aisha cut in. "You're saying the sheriff's a crook, Jamal? That's big. What's next?" He gripped the mic. "Justice, real justice, not their lies. Crestwood's got blood on its badge and I'm not shutting up." And the broadcast hit the airwaves like a bomb, crackling through car radios and kitchen speakers, black folks cheering, white folks fuming. And by noon it went viral, picked up by Birmingham stations, then Montgomery. The hashtag Free Jamal trending as calls flooded Aisha's line. "That kid's a hero. Pruitt's done." Protesters swarmed Crestwood Square by dusk, 50 then 100, fists raised, signs scrawled with "End the corruption," and Jamal watched from the trailer's window, heart pounding, because this was it, the tide turning. And when the governor's office called Pruitt that night, voice tight, "You're suspended pending investigation." "Sheriff, this is a mess." Jamal punched the air, Lena hugging him fierce. "You did it, baby. They're scared now." And for a moment he believed it, the system buckling under its own weight. Pruitt's badge stripped, his empire cracking, a triumph sweeter than the appeal, because this wasn't just his win, it was everyone's. The high lasted 12 hours, until the rally hit its peak the next day, 200 strong outside the courthouse. Jamal stepping up to a megaphone, his borrowed shirt soaked with sweat, voice booming, "We're not invisible anymore, they can't silence us." And the crowd roared, a wave of sound that shook the oaks, until a crack split the air, sharper than thunder, and pain seared his left arm, a bullet grazing his bicep, blood blooming red as he stumbled, the megaphone crashing to the pavement. Screams erupted, folks scattering, Lena diving for him. "Jamal, get down!" And he hit the dirt, eyes wide, scanning the chaos as a patrol car peeled out from an alley, its lights flashing once before vanishing, a ghost in the dusk, and Jamal's breath hitched, because that wasn't random. It was a sniper, a message with his name on it. Lena tore her sleeve, wrapping his arm tight, blood soaking through. "You're okay, baby, stay with me." And protesters circled, shielding him, but the fear sank deep because this wasn't Pruitt alone, this was bigger, colder. A hand reaching from shadows he couldn't see. They limped back to the trailer, Lena's co-worker stitching the grays with shaky hands, and as Jamal sat, arm throbbing, a note slipped under the door, scrawled in jagged black ink. "Next one's between the eyes," and his stomach twisted. The victory souring fast, because the governor's probe stalled that night, a press release citing insufficient evidence, and Pruitt's suspension held, but no cuffs, no jail, just a slap, while the real threat loomed, untouchable. Jamal stared at the note, blood crusted on his sleeve, and Lena whispered, "They're not stopping, are they?" And he shook his head, voice low, "No, Ma, they're reloading." because the broadcast had rattled them, sure, but it had also painted a bullseye, and this wasn't about a truck or a statue anymore. It was about survival. And Crestwood's machine didn't just bend under pressure, it killed to stay whole. The trailer grew quiet, wind rattling the tin, and Jamal traced the grays with his fingers, pain grounding him because he'd thought public shame would break them. But it had only sharpened their claws, and as the night deepened, he knew the governor's words were hollow. The protests a spark they'd drown in blood because the system's reach stretched beyond Pruitt, beyond Voss, into places he couldn't name, and every step he took pulled him deeper into a war he might not walk away from. Lena sat beside him, hand on his knee. "We keep going, right?" And Jamal nodded, slow and fierce, because backing down wasn't an option, not when they'd shot at him, not when they'd burned Tilly out, not when they'd trashed his home. And as the stars blinked through the trailer's cracked window, he vowed to hit back harder. Because if they wanted him dead, they'd have to try a hell of a lot harder than this. Jamal Carter sat at the wobbly kitchen table in the rusted trailer, the Alabama night pressing in thick and humid through the cracked window, his left arm throbbing where the sniper's bullet had grazed him 2 days ago, the makeshift bandage, crusty with dried blood as he scratched out a federal civil rights lawsuit on a legal pad, his sharp brown eyes glinting with a fire that no beating, no betrayal, no near-death could snuff out, because Pruitt's suspension wasn't enough. Not after the mob, the fire, the shot. This was war, and he'd hit them where it hurt. Lena hovered nearby, her faded jacket swapped for a worn sweater, her hands wringing a dish towel as she watched him, voice low. "You sure about this, baby? Federal's a whole new beast." And Jamal nodded, jaw tight. "They shot at me. Ma burned Tilly out, they don't get to walk away." Because the note still sat on the table, next one's between the eyes. A promise he'd turn into their funeral. He'd spent hours digging through dispatch logs Aisha had snagged from a cousin at the sheriff's station, pages of scribbled times and codes proving Tate's stops targeted black kids 10 times more than white, a pattern of profiling so blatant it screamed violation, and Jamal wove it into his suit, Title 42, Section 1983, Civil Rights under Color of Law, naming Voss, Pruitt, and Tate. Because this wasn't just about him, it was about every kid Crestwood crushed. Aisha burst in at dawn, dreadlocks bouncing, her voice electric. "Jamal, I've got the station primed. We're airing this live. Federal lawsuit. Big leagues. You ready?" And he grabbed his notes, arm aching but steady. "Let's do it." Because the airwaves had rattled them once, and now he'd shake the whole state. They piled into her rattling pickup, the trailer fading in the rear view as they sped to the shed. The AM signal crackling to life at 10 sharp, and Aisha shoved the mic forward. "Crestwood, Jamal Carter's back, and he's suing the system. Live now." And Jamal leaned in, voice cutting like a blade. "Sheriff Pruitt, Deputy Tate, Judge Voss violated my rights, racial profiling, evidence tampering, retaliation. I've got logs showing they stopped black kids like me for breathing. I'm filing in federal court, enough's enough." The broadcast exploded, Birmingham News picking it up by noon, Montgomery by dusk. And when Aisha aired the logs, line by line, the internet erupted. Justice for Jamal trending nationwide, protesters swelling to 300 outside the courthouse chanting his name. And Jamal stood in the trailer, fists clenched, because this was power, real power, the kind that made giants flinch. 2 days later, a federal judge in Mobile, a stern black woman named Evelyn Grant, granted an injunction, halting Jamal's probation pending review, her voice crackling through Aisha's radio. Carter's claims warrant investigation, probation's frozen. And Jamal whooped, Lena hugging him tight. "You're free, baby, for now." Because Hicks couldn't touch him, not yet, and Pruitt's suspension deepened, the governor's probe widening, a triumph so sweet he could taste it, the system bending under his 17-year-old will. The high lasted 18 hours, until Voss struck back, his silver hair glinting under courthouse lights as he sat in his chambers that night, fingers drumming the desk, his cold blue eyes blazing with a fury that could melt steel, because Jamal's lawsuit wasn't just a challenge, it was a humiliation, and he'd rather die than let a black kid topple him. He called Tate, voice low. "We end this now." And by morning, a new charge hit the wires: murder, Jamal Carter accused of killing Ms. Tilly in the arson that gutted her store, a fabricated warrant claiming he'd torched it to silence her, and Voss signed it himself, smirking. Let's see him lawyer his way out of this. Deputies stormed the trailer at noon, boots crashing through the flimsy door. Guns drawn as Jamal and Lena froze, Aisha mid-broadcast on her phone. They're here, oh God! And Tate grabbed Jamal, slamming him against the wall, cuffs biting into his wrists as he snarled, "You're done, murderer!" And Lena screamed, "He was with me, it's a lie." But the deputies shoved her back, tearing the trailer apart, papers scattering like confetti. The arrest hit live, Aisha's stream cutting out as Jamal's voice rang, "This is Voss, he's framing me!" And they hauled him out, blood dripping from a split lip Tate's elbow had given him. The trailer's tin walls rattling as Lena pounded the floor. "You can't take him!" Crestwood streets blurred past the cruiser's window, protesters scattering as sirens wailed, and Jamal sat shackled, heart pounding, because this wasn't probation, this was death row bait, a charge so wild it could bury him forever, and Voss's gloat echoed in his head. "Genius don't mean invincible, boy," a taunt from the courtroom, now a prophecy. They dumped him in county jail, a grey fortress 10 miles out, the cell colder than juvie, concrete slick with damp, and guards sneered, "Murderers here," as inmates eyed him like meat because Voss had painted him a killer, and the feds backed off, Grant's injunction meaningless against a capital crime, the probe stalling as Pruitt smirked from suspension, untouchable. Jamal slumped against the wall, cuffs off but wrists raw, the trailer's chaos replaying, Lena's cries, Aisha's cut-off scream, and he knew this was the counterpunch, Voss's nuclear option, because a lawsuit threatened their throne, and murder pinned him tight, a noose he'd have to slip with nothing but his mind. The cell block hummed with threats, inmates banging bars, and Jamal traced the logs in his head, the suit still alive, because if they thought this would shut him up, they'd misjudged him again. And as the lights dimmed, he vowed to fight, because death was their play, but survival was his. Can a kid's lawsuit really scare a judge into murder? Does Voss think he's untouchable, or is he just desperate? Comment number 1 if you believe Jamal's still got a shot to break this frame up. Hit like if this twist has you raging, and subscribe to see him claw out of this grave. What happens when a judge rigs a death sentence to silence a teenager? And the only way out is through the fire. Don't blink, because the next move's gonna burn everything down. Jamal Carter slumped against the slick concrete wall of his cell in Crestwood County Jail, the air cold and damp, a stark contrast to the humid Alabama night outside, his wrists raw from the cuffs Tate had slapped on him during the trailer raid, the split lip still stinging as dried blood flaked onto his borrowed shirt, now torn at the shoulder from the deputy's rough hands, because Voss's murder charge wasn't just a threat. It was a guillotine, pinning him with Tilly's arson. Death, a lie so bold it could choke him if he didn't fight fast. The cell block buzzed with menace, a grey fortress 10 miles from town, its steel bars rattling as inmates shouted, "Fresh meat," their voices hungry, and Jamal knew the word had spread. Murderer, a black kid who dared sue the system. And in here, that made him a target, not a hero. He'd been locked up 12 hours, no lawyer, no call, just a metal bunk and a toilet that reeked of rust, the guards smirking as they passed. Voss says hi, because this wasn't juvie's. Petty beatings. This was death row's shadow. A capital charge that could land him strapped to a table if he didn't move quick. Footsteps echoed late that night. Not the guard's lazy shuffle, but a purposeful stomp. And the door clanged open. 5 inmates piling in, a lynch mob with shanks glinting in the dim light. Their leader, a hulking white man with a shaved head, and a swastika tattooed on his neck, snarling, "Heard you're the lawyer boy, Voss's pet project, time to bleed." And Jamal scrambled back, heart slamming, because this wasn't random, it was bought, Voss's reach stretching through. The bars. The first swing came fast, a fist cracking his jaw, sending him sprawling, and a shank grazed his ribs, blood seeping warm through his shirt as he rolled, dodging a second stab, the concrete biting his knees. But his mind raced, sharper than the blades, because he'd survived juvie, he'd survived this. "Wait," he gasped, voice steady despite the pain. "I can get you out. Legal help, appeals. I know the law." And the leader paused, shank hovering, eyes narrowing. "You're full of it." But Jamal pressed, Check my record. Overturned. A theft charge in 10 days, I'll draft your motions, no cost. And the deal hung there, desperate, raw, a barter for his life. The hulking man grunted, lowering the blade. Prove it or you're dead tomorrow. And they backed off, leaving Jamal panting, blood pooling under him, because he'd bought time, not safety. And as the door locked, he tore his sleeve, pressing it to the cut. The sting grounding him because he needed a play, something big. Morning brought a guard. A skinny black kid named Marcus with nervous eyes, slipping him a pen and paper, whispering, "Heard you on Aisha's show. You're legit, use this." And Jamal grabbed it, hands shaking, scribbling a motion exposing. Voss's shell company, Crestwood Corrections LLC, tied to the jail. A conflict of interest so blatant it could force his recusal, because if Voss owned this cage, he couldn't judge it too. He slid it back to Marcus. "Get this to Aisha Brooks' radio station now." And Marcus nodded, slipping away, a lifeline tossed into the void. Because if it aired, Voss might buckle, but the clock was ticking, and the mob's deadline loomed. Hours later, the cell block's radio crackled, Aisha's voice blasting, "Jamal Carter's filing from jail, says Judge Voss owns shares in Crestwood Corrections, recuse or resign." And the inmates cheered, guards cursed, and by dusk, word. Hit? Voss recused himself under pressure, a new judge tossing the murder charge on technicalities. No evidence, no witness, just a sheriff's word, and Jamal walked free, staggering into the evening air, ribs bleeding, jaw swollen, but alive, thinking he'd won, until he reached the trailer. Its door ajar, Lena gone, the place trashed, papers shredded, furniture smashed. His stomach dropped, knees buckling as he stumbled inside. "Ma?" Echoing unanswered, and a phone rang, a burner left on the table, buzzing like a hornet, and when he snatched it, a voice growled, "Drop the suit or she's dead." Pruitt's drawl unmistakable, thick with venom because Voss might be out, but the sheriff wasn't, and this wasn't a courtroom play, it was a gut punch. Lena's life, the price. Jamal froze, the trailer's tin walls closing in, the pen still in his pocket, blood crusted on his hands because he'd slipped the noose, beaten the mob, forced Voss's hand, but Pruitt had flipped the board, taken his mother, the one rock. He'd never lose, and the voice barked again. "Clock's ticking, boy, choose," before the line died, leaving silence heavier than the jail's bars. He sank to the floor, head spinning, the motion's victory ash in his mouth, because freedom meant nothing if Lena paid for it, and Pruitt's men had her, somewhere dark, somewhere close. And Jamal knew this was the real hit, not a bullet, not a shank, but a knife to his soul, because they'd seen his strength, his fight, and gone for the heart instead. The night deepened, wind howling through the broken door, and Jamal stood, slow and fierce because they'd pushed him to the edge, but he wasn't falling. Not yet, and as he gripped the burner, replaying Pruitt's growl, he traced the law. In his mind, every statute, every trick, because this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her, and he'd tear Crestwood apart to get her back. The trailer creaked, shadows stretching long, and Jamal's breath steadied. Pain fueling him because they'd taken his mother, his anchor, but they'd forgotten one thing. He was a weapon too, and if Pruitt wanted a ransom, he'd pay in. Blood because Jamal wasn't dropping anything. He was doubling down, and this war just got personal. A fight he'd win or die trying. Because Lena wasn't just his mother, she was his why, and they'd regret ever touching her. Jamal Carter stood in the trashed trailer, the Alabama night seeping through the broken door, cold and heavy, his sharp brown eyes tracing the wreckage of Lena's absence. Shredded papers strewn like confetti, chairs overturned, the burner phone, clutched tight in his trembling hand. Pruitt's voice still echoing, "Drop the suit or she's dead." A threat that carved a hole in his chest, because Voss's recusal and his jail release meant nothing if his mother was gone, taken by the sheriff's men to choke his fight. His ribs ached from the shank graze. His jaw throbbed from the mob's fists. But pain was fuel now, and he rummaged through the debris, finding Lena's old nursing bag, a snub-nosed revolver tucked inside, a secret she'd kept from her hospital. Days. Its weight cold and solid as he slipped it into his waistband. Because law books wouldn't save her, bullets might. He grabbed Pruitt's patrol logs from the lawsuit, pages Aisha had aired, and pored over them under the trailer's flickering bulb, his mind racing, because the sheriff's last entry listed a stop at Old Mill Road, an abandoned stretch 5 miles out, a hunch screaming this was where they'd stashed her, a crumbling relic off Crestwood's grid. Jamal slipped out, the night cloaking him in shadow, his borrowed shirt soaked with sweat as he hotwired a neighbor's beat-up sedan, the engine coughing to life, because time was bleeding out, and he'd rather die than let Pruitt win this round. The drive was a blur, pines flashing past, the revolver digging into his hip, and he parked a quarter-mile from the mill, its sagging silhouette looming under a sliver of moon, rusted beams jutting like bones, the air thick with damp rot, and the faint hum of crickets, a perfect cage for a hostage. He crept closer, sneakers silent on the dirt, heart slamming as he spotted 2 deputies by the entrance, their uniforms crisp, rifles slung lazy over their shoulders, and Jamal ducked behind a rotting crate, breath shallow, because this was it. No backup, no plan, just him and the gun he'd never fired. Voices drifted out, low and rough. "Boss says break her if the kid don't fold," and Jamal's blood boiled, because that was Lena they were talking about, his rock, and he'd kill them all before they touched her again. He waited, counting breaths until one deputy lit a cigarette, turning away, and Jamal bolted, slamming the revolver's butt into the smoker's skull, the man crumpling with a grunt, the second spinning too late as Jamal tackled him, knee to throat, whispering, "Where is she?" And the deputy choked. Inside basement, before Jamal knocked him cold with a crack to the jaw, their rifles clattering as he dragged them into the shadows, adrenaline surging, because he was in. He was close. The mill's interior was a maze of rust and dust, beams groaning overhead, and Jamal slipped down a rickety stairwell, the revolver cocked, every creak a gunshot in his ears, until he hit the basement, a cavernous pit lit by a single bulb, and there she was, Lena tied to a chair, her dark hair matted with blood, her nurse's scrubs torn, her eyes wide as she saw him. "Jamal, no!" But he rushed forward, cutting the ropes with a shard of glass, her wrists raw, her voice a rasp. "They're coming back, go," and he pulled her up. "Not without you, Ma." Footsteps thudded above, shouts echoing, and Jamal shoved Lena behind a stack of crates, the revolver raised as 3 of Pruitt's men burst in, guns drawn, a lean one barking, "There's the little bastard!" and bullets flew, splintering. Wood as Jamal fired back, the kick jarring his arm. A wild shot clipping a deputy's shoulder, the man howling as he dropped, and Jamal grabbed Lena, sprinting for a side exit, her breaths ragged, his heart a drumbeat, because they were out. They were alive. They stumbled into the night, the sedan 100 yards off, and Jamal half carried her, legs burning, the mill's chaos fading behind them, Pruitt's men cursing as they fired blind, bullets whizzing past, one grazing the dirt at his feet, and Jamal shoved Lena into the car, slamming the gas, tires spinning mud as they roared away, her hand gripping his arm. "You did it, baby." And he grinned, fierce and raw, because he'd saved her, beaten them, a high so pure it drowned the pain until headlights flared in the rear view, a SWAT van screaming closer, black and sleek, no sirens, just death. The van rammed them, metal crunching as the sedan fishtailed, Jamal wrenching the wheel. "Hold on, Ma." But the SWAT team swarmed, masked figures in tactical gear, rifles barking as they strafed the car, glass exploding inward, and Jamal floored it, weaving through pines until a shot punched through the windshield, Lena gasping, blood blooming on her chest, her eyes wide with shock as she slumped. "Jamal," a whisper lost in the roar. He screamed her name, swerving hard, the sedan skidding into a ditch, and the SWAT team closed in, boots pounding as they ripped him out, cuffs snapping tight, slamming him to the ground, his face in the mud, Lena's blood on his hands, and a masked voice snarled, "Cop killer, you're done," because the deputy he'd shot lay dead at the mill, self-defense twisted into murder, and Jamal thrashed, "She's dying, help her." But they dragged him off, her body limp in the wreck, the high of rescue, crashing into despair, because he'd won her back only to lose her, Pruitt's trap snapping shut with a tracker they'd never seen. The van peeled out, Lena's gasps fading, and Jamal's world shattered, the revolver gone, his mother bleeding out, the SWAT team's boots a drumbeat of doom because they'd flipped salvation into slaughter, and as the mill vanished in the dark, he knew this wasn't just retaliation, it was annihilation, Pruitt's final play to break him body and soul. The cuffs bit deep, mud caking his face, and Jamal's screams turned to sobs because he'd fought with everything, saved her for a heartbeat, only to watch her slip away. And as the van rumbled toward jail, he clung to her last word, Jamal. A lifeline he'd killed to keep, because they'd taken her, but they hadn't taken him, not yet. And this war wasn't over. It was bleeding, raw, and personal. A fight he'd finish or die in because Lena was worth it, every damn second. Jamal Carter sat shackled in the back of a SWAT van, the Alabama dawn breaking gray and merciless through the cracked windshield. His hands slick with Lena's blood, her last gasp. Jamal, echoing in his skull as the vehicle rumbled toward Crestwood County Jail. His borrowed shirt torn and soaked, the revolver's weight gone from his waistband, replaced by cuffs that bit into his wrists because the mill shootout had flipped his rescue into a death sentence. A deputy's corpse pinning him with a cop killer. Charge, life in prison looming. And Lena's fate a knife twisting deeper. Her body left bleeding in the ditch, alive or dead he didn't know, because they'd dragged him away before he could save her again. The jail swallowed him whole, a grey fortress buzzing with hate, guards slamming him into a cell, cop killers here. Their sneers a chorus as inmates banged bars, but Jamal's mind didn't break. It sharpened, because Voss's murder, Frame-Up and Pruitt's kidnapping had pushed him past fear, past pain, into a cold, relentless fury. And he'd fight this with everything left, because losing Lena wasn't an option, not yet. 3 days later, they hauled him to court. A new judge, a wiry white man named Ellis with tired eyes, no Voss this time, his recusal holding, and Jamal stood at the defense table, no lawyer, just a 17-year-old black kid in chains, facing a DA named Leonard Hayes, a slick white man with a sharp suit and sharper lies because the system wasn't done. It was doubling down. The gallery packed tight, protesters outside chanting, "Free Jamal." Aisha's radio crackling live from the steps, and Jamal's bruised ribs ached as he spoke, voice steady. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor. Not guilty. This is retaliation." And Ellis nodded. Proceed. Because the feds were watching now, Grant's injunction still echoing, and Jamal had one shot to bury them all. Hayes strutted up, voice smooth. "Mr. Carter killed a deputy in cold blood, fled the scene, a danger to society." But Jamal cut in. "Self-defense. They kidnapped my mother. I've got proof." And he unleashed it. Bank records Aisha had, dug up, leaked by a dying deputy's widow, showing Voss funneling cash to Pruitt through Crestwood Corrections LLC, payoffs to Tate for false arrests, a taped confession from the deputy he'd shot, mailed to Aisha before the mill, rasping, "Voss ordered it, frame the kid, burn the store." And Jamal played it on a smuggled recorder, the room erupting as Hayes paled. "Objection," but Ellis waved it off. "Overruled. Keep going." Jamal paced, chains clinking. "They framed me for Tilly's murder, burned her store, shot at me, kidnapped Lena. This is their empire, Your Honor, and I've got the receipts." And he dropped more, dispatch logs, Pruitt's patrol routes, a photo of the spray can in his yard, every piece a hammer cracking their lies, and the gallery roared, black folks cheering, white ones hissing, because this wasn't just a defense, it was a dismantling, a teenager tearing down decades of corruption. With his bare hands, Hayes scrambled. "This is speculation, no chain of custody." But Jamal fired back, "Then subpoena the banks, the widow, check the logs, it's all there." And Ellis's eyes narrowed, leaning forward, because the feds were in the back row now, suits scribbling. And the air shifted, heavy with collapse. Mid-trial, a deputy burst in, "Arrest warrant, Harlan Voss, fraud, tampering." And the room exploded. Voss dragged in cuffs from the hall, his silver hair wild, his cold blue eyes blazing hate at Jamal. "You little bastard." But Jamal stared back unflinching because this was it, the giant falling. And Pruitt's men flipped next, 2 deputies cutting deals, testifying live. Sheriff ordered the kidnapping. Voss paid for the arson. And Hayes sank, hands shaking, because the system wasn't just cracking, it was imploding brick by brick. Ellis banged his gavel. "Order, order." And the governor's voice hit the radio, Aisha airing it live, pardoning Jamal Carter. Charges dropped, investigation expanded. And Jamal stood frozen, chains rattling, a rush of triumph flooding. His veins, because he'd done it, toppled Voss, freed himself. and as the cuffs came off, he vowed to sue the state. "This ain't over, they'll pay." And the gallery surged, folks rushing him. "You're a hero, kid." But the win lasted 30 seconds until he stepped outside, the sun blinding, protesters parting, and climbed into Aisha's pickup. Let's find Ma, because Lena was still out there, hurt or worse. He turned the key, the engine rumbling, and then it hit, a deafening roar, the truck erupting in a fireball, glass and metal shredding the air as Jamal flew, slamming into the pavement, flames licking his legs, his ears ringing, skin burning as screams pierced the chaos. "Bomb, it's a bomb," and he rolled, gasping, alive but scorched, the pickup a twisted husk, Aisha yanking him back. "Jamal, stay with me." But his eyes blurred, blood trickling from his temple, because this wasn't Pruitt, not Voss, this was deeper, a strike from shadows he'd never seen, and he whispered, "They'll never stop," voice raw, because the pardon, the arrests, the cheers meant nothing if they'd kill him to shut him up. The courthouse steps smoked, protesters scattering, sirens wailing, and Jamal lay there, burned but breathing. Lena's fate a void he couldn't fill, because he'd won the trial, broken their throne. But the system didn't die. It lashed. And this bomb was proof, a message louder than any gavel. They'd lost the court but not the war, and as medics rushed in, his mind raced, tracing the blast, because someone higher, someone untouchable, wanted him gone, and he'd find them. Burn them back, because this wasn't victory. It was a dare, a gauntlet he'd pick up with his last breath. The stretcher came, Aisha's voice fading. "You're okay, kid." But Jamal's eyes stayed open, fixed on the sky, because they'd hit him hardest when he'd hit them deepest, and as the pain swallowed him, he clung to one truth. Lena was out there, and he'd fight through hell to know, because this implosion wasn't the end. It was the spark, and Crestwood's shadows would bleed before he was done. Jamal Carter woke in a sterile hospital bed 3 days after the car bomb, the Alabama air sharp with antiseptic, his legs wrapped in bandages where flames had licked his skin, his sharp brown eyes blinking against the harsh white light, every breath a rasp through cracked ribs, the blast's echo still ringing in his skull as he traced the burns, a map of Crestwood's hate etched into his flesh, because the trial's triumph, Voss's arrest, Pruitt's collapse, the governor's pardon, all of it had shattered in that fireball, a message from shadows he couldn't name. And Lena's fate gnawed at him, her blood on his hands, her body lost in the ditch, alive or dead, a void he couldn't fill. Aisha sat beside him, dreadlocks spilling over her shoulders, her voice soft but urgent. "You're alive, kid, that's what counts, nations watching now." And she showed him her phone, headlines screaming, "Teen lawyer survives assassination." Attempt, Crestwood corruption exposed, because the bomb hadn't silenced him. It had screamed his story louder, protests swelling from hundreds to thousands, Montgomery to Mobile, justice for Jamal, a war cry on every screen, and Jamal nodded, weak but fierce. "They messed up, Aisha, this ain't hiding no more." Doctors patched him up, 6 weeks of recovery in a safe house 50 miles out, a squat cabin tucked in pine woods, federal marshals guarding the perimeter, because the feds had swooped in, Grant's injunction morphing into a full probe, and Jamal became a symbol, a 17-year-old black kid who'd cracked a system's spine, his face on newsstands, his voice on loops, Aisha's broadcasts replaying the taped confession, the bank records, the logs, a tidal wave no sheriff could outrun. By month's end, Aisha broke the story wide. State Senator Roland Tate, kin to Deputy Tate, planted the bomb tied to Voss's payoffs, her voice crackling through the cabin's radio, and Jamal's jaw tightened, because this wasn't just Crestwood, it was Alabama's elite, a web of white power strangling justice, and the feds raided Tate's mansion that night, hauling him out in cuffs, his slick gray suit rumpled, his pale face snarling. "That kid's a liar." But the evidence buried him, bomb schematics, wire transfers, a call log to Pruitt, and the state buckled. A domino fall that toppled Crestwood's corrupt core, judges resigning, deputies flipping, a reckoning Jamal had ignited with nothing but his mind. Protests raged, thousands marching, "End the system," and Jamal watched from hiding, burns healing slow, his wiry frame leaner, his eyes older, because he'd won. Voss in jail, Pruitt facing trial, Tate's empire dust, but Lena's absence. was a wound no victory could stitch, her fate a ghost haunting every headline, every cheer. And he whispered to the empty woods, "Where are you, Ma?" Because this wasn't whole without her. Not yet. Law school loomed, applications drafted under an alias James Cole, because Jamal Carter was too hot, too hunted, and he'd study, fight, tear it all down from the inside. But the quiet, gnawed, 6 months probation-free, a hero in hiding, until Aisha burst in one evening, eyes wild, "You need to see this," and dragged him to her truck, radio blaring as they sped back to Crestwood, the town's edges buzzing with feds, reporters, a circus he'd sparked. They hit the square, the Confederate statue toppled by protesters, and there she was, Lena, stepping from a black sedan, her dark hair loose, her nurse's scrubs swapped for a plain coat, her face bruised but alive, and Jamal stumbled out, legs shaking. "Ma?" Choking out as she ran to him, arms wrapping tight, her voice a sob. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." And the world tilted because she wasn't dead. She'd survived, and tears streaked his burned cheeks as he hugged her, the crowd parting, cameras flashing, because this was the twist, the miracle he'd never dared hope. She pulled back, eyes fierce. "I faked it, Jamal, played dead after the shot, crawled out when they left, been hiding, gathering this." And she handed him a dossier, thick with dirt, bank statements, emails, a mole's work tracing senator. Tate's orders to Pruitt, Voss, a blueprint of the bomb, because Lena hadn't just lived. She'd fought, a shadow warrior while he broke the front lines, and Jamal stared, voice cracking, "You're insane, Ma." But she grinned. "Had to match you, didn't I?" The feds swarmed, snatching the dossier, and Aisha aired it live. Lena Carter's alive, drops evidence to bury Tate. The square erupting as marshals dragged more suits out. Aides, cronies, a clean sweep of Alabama's rot. And Jamal stood with Lena, burned but unbowed, because this wasn't just survival, it was victory. A mother and son flipping the tables, their defiance a torch that lit the state ablaze because they'd underestimated her too, and together they'd torn the roof off. The crowd chanted their names, Jamal, Lena, a rhythm of justice, and he whispered, "We end this together," as she nodded, handing him a pen. "Write it, baby. Law school, the courts, we're not stopping." Because this wasn't the end, it was a beginning. A war won, but a battle line drawn. And as sirens wailed, feds closing in, Jamal felt the weight lift, not gone, but shared. Because Lena was back, his rock, his partner, and Crestwood's shadows shrank under their glare. Night fell, the square glowing with flashlights, and Jamal stood taller. Burns a badge because they'd tried to kill him, her, their fight. But they'd failed, and as the dossier's pages scattered to the wind, he knew Tate's fall was just the start. A crack widened to a chasm, and he'd keep swinging because this was bigger now, a movement, a legacy. And with Lena beside him, they'd chase it to the end, wherever it led, because they'd turned the tables, and the system would never sleep easy again. The stars blinked through the oaks, the crowd thinning, and Jamal gripped her hand, voice low. "We did it, Ma." And she squeezed back, "Yeah, baby, and we're just getting started," because the bomb had burned them, the bullets had grazed, but they'd risen, a duo no shadow could bury. And as the sirens faded, he vowed to finish what they'd begun, because Crestwood was dust, but the war stretched wide, and they'd fight it together, unyielding, unstoppable. Jamal Carter's journey through Crestwood's corrupt underbelly teaches us that systemic racism isn't just a backdrop. It's a living, breathing beast that fights to protect itself. At 17, Jamal faced false arrests, beatings, and a courtroom designed to crush him, all because his black skin marked him as a target in a town steeped in prejudice. His story reveals a harsh truth. Brilliance alone doesn't shield you from injustice when the system's rigged from the top down. Yet, Jamal's resilience, forged through self-taught legal mastery, shows that knowledge can crack even the thickest walls of oppression. He turned their own laws against them, exposing Voss, Pruitt, and Tate's empire of hate, proving that power bends when you refuse to break. Lena's survival and secret fight amplify this lesson. Community and cunning can turn victims into warriors, flipping despair into defiance. Together, they didn't just survive, they ignited a movement, toppling a senator and shaking Alabama's elite. But the bomb, the sniper, the arson remind us, Victory comes at a cost, and the system doesn't die quietly. It lashes out, desperate to cling to control. Jamal's tale isn't a fairy tale. It's a war cry, showing that one voice, backed by grit and truth, can spark a reckoning, but only if others rise with it. The real lesson? Change isn't won alone. It's a collective roar against silence, a refusal to let the shadows win. So, what would you do if Crestwood's hate came for you? Comment below with your fight. Would you stand like Jamal or crumble under the weight? Hit like if this racist story lit a fire in you, subscribe to catch more battles against injustice, and share to spread the call. Thanks for riding this roller coaster with us. Stay bold, stay loud, and may you always find strength to challenge the dark, because the fight's not over until we all win.